Good evening, everyone. My name is Loretta Marshik. I'm the Assistant City Engineer. My name's on the letter that you all received with regards to the 2021 Mill and Overlay Project. And we're really happy that you joined us tonight with your questions. And hopefully we can explain some things to you, answer more of your questions. I would like to introduce our consultants with KLJ, Carl Jackson and James Godrowski. Hopefully I didn't screw that up too much, James. They're going to give us a short presentation. After that, we have an opportunity for people that are watching on their computer to call in. So we're going to see if anyone has any questions that way. And then we would be happy to entertain the questions that you all have. Once that portion is over, we'll go back to the open house style of meeting if you want to just meet with all of us one-on-one and continue on with your questions. So with that, I hand it over to Carl Jackson, and he's going to walk us through the project. Thank you again.
Thanks, Loretta. As she mentioned, my name is Carl Jackson with James Godrowski. James is our lead project engineer, and so if we get into the real technical details of the plan here and what we're planning for design and construction, James can help answer those questions. As Loretta mentioned, the plan tonight is a brief presentation, and there's just a few slides here because it'll be more important to just get involved in dialogue with you, whether it's as a group, which we welcome, or again one-on-one after this. So I want to touch on a couple of housekeeping things before we get into it. First of all, help yourself to the water in the back. The restrooms are straight out the doors and a little bit to your right if you need a restroom. We have a sign-in sheet here. If you have not signed that, we would appreciate you taking a couple seconds to do that. It would just be nice to keep track of who came tonight, who asked questions, who is available and whatnot, so we appreciate your time doing that. There's also a comment sheet in the back. You're welcome to grab a comment sheet, and you can leave written comments here tonight, or you can email them. That email address is on the letter you received. That email address is also on the comment sheet if you need a reminder where to send your written comments. Let's see. Oh, for anyone interested, the detailed preliminary engineering report, there are 2 copies of that report on the back table. You're welcome to flip through that and ask us questions if you have any questions on that. So, like I said, we just have a couple of slides here to give a project overview, kind of give you a little bit about the background and what we're thinking for this year's project, and then we'll open it up to questions. So generally speaking, this is the 2021 Mill and Overlay. This is an annual program the City of Dickinson has done. The assessment part of it is a little new. The last year was the first year that the assessments really became part of the annual program, but for years before that, there was an annual program to replace pavements, concrete throughout the city. However, the city realized that they weren't keeping up with the maintenance, and so if you don't keep up with the maintenance at the right pace, you end up losing your opportunity to maintain the streets, and you end up needing to completely tear them up and rebuild them. And so one of the opportunities, one of the vehicles that the city decided to use was this assessment method. And so the special assessment policy that was adopted by the city in late 2019 was its way of trying to get back ahead with maintenance before the full replacement became really expensive. Special assessments, for those of you that have lived in other communities, you probably know that that's not a new idea, although it's a little new to Dickinson. It's a commonly used way to help offset the cost of infrastructure for a lot of municipalities in this region and beyond. So the street maintenance project, it involves paving, curb, gutter, sidewalks, ADA upgrades, which are the corner handicap ramps that you see, and then some small improvements to your driveways. Mainly if a drive approach needs to be cleaned up, if you will, we'll fix the driveways as we're coming by. The point though is that we're not going to go back into your driveway beyond the sidewalk. The intent is to just fix the driveways adjacent to the curb there. The project does not include any utility upgrades, so no water, no sewer. As far as drainage upgrades, we'll have some valley gutters. We'll work on fixing drainage on the surface, but we're not doing any subsurface drainage improvements. So no storm drain pipes, no storm drain inlets, things like that. It's purely a paving project, and then the incidentals required to get the paving complete. The project started back in late August, early September, KLJ was hired by the city to do kind of a preliminary assessment of potential areas throughout the city that could work for this year's paving project. And so we presented those ideas at the September 15th City Commission meeting. We presented 6 zones at the time, and we basically identified those zones based on a combination of the pavement condition that's in place today, and then lumping certain blocks together to keep within the city's budget this year for construction. And then we also considered things like, you know, are there a bunch of blocks within Zone X here where we know the city is going to be replacing utilities in the next few years? And if the answer is yes, we ended up tossing those out because we don't want to pave something that's going to get torn up to replace a water main in a few years anyway. So that's how we basically came around to recommend this particular zone at the City Commission. And so that was approved by the commission back in September, and then the time between then and now was the time it took for us to do the more detailed field assessments and preliminary design, and we're in the middle of the design phase right now. This vicinity map on your screen, hopefully it looks familiar. I think it was in your packets that you received, but it's just showing the district boundary. And so obviously bound between 9th Street and I-94, and then 4th Avenue East and 10th Avenue East. There are a couple little blocks right in the middle that are actually out of the district, and that's because a couple are private streets, and a couple of them were deemed in good enough condition where they didn't need any maintenance work this year. Okay, and then just to again touch on the special assessment policy. I already talked about some of these points, but you know, as far as the City Commission's objective, again, it was to try and get back ahead of the maintenance projects that were kind of lagging behind, considering the citywide pavement condition. As far as the history of assessments in Dickinson, those of you that have been here for a long time know that special assessments were not uncommon 40 years ago, but with the last boom-bust cycle that occurred, it ended up leaving a lot of debt to the city when properties went back to taxes. And so there weren't special assessments then for many years because that really put the city in a burden for a long time. And so this new policy, again, it's different than the way things were assessed before. Before, I think, if I understand things right, properties were assessed for everything, utilities, all the street paving and everything. And in this particular policy, again, it's focused on concrete improvements, not the asphalt paving and not the utilities and whatnot. The policy was written and is being administered in accordance with the North Dakota Century Code. The improvements per this policy are to be done in conjunction with an overall street maintenance project. So that really is the overall intent of the policy. There are a few exceptions where properties would not be assessed for concrete work, and one example is, again, the corners. So if you're coming around a corner and we need to put in ADA ramps, from where the corner starts to where the corner ends, that's paid for by the city. That's not being assessed. Some other examples of what's not assessed, if there happens to be concrete on a back lot line, that wouldn't be assessed. I'm forgetting one. Oh, okay, well, if the city if your concrete's in good condition, but the city, for its convenience to get another part of construction built, has to tear out your concrete that is, again, in good condition, then you won't be assessed for that. You know, if the city needs to cut out your concrete to rerun your water service line, we're not going to come in and assess you for that concrete if it's in good shape. And then there is a provision in the policy that says case-by-case basis. If the city engineer determines that an assessment is not applicable to a certain property for some unique reason, then the city engineer does have that discretion to decide not to assess a certain property. So moving into actually creating this district, on January 19th, we finished the preliminary engineering report and came to the City Commission, presented the overall summary of that report along with the updated cost estimate for the project. And the City Commission at that time approved a preliminary necessity to create, it was a resolution to create with the intent to create a district. And that began the process of the public comment period. And so you received your letter dated January 26th, and that initiated that 30-day comment period. And so that's this, and I think you're all well aware, the protest period, that again is dictated by the North Dakota Century Code. I should clarify that the 50% protest that many of you are aware of and that we're talking about is 50% of the land within the district. So it's not 50% of the property owners. Submit your protest to the City of Dickinson. Again, we can provide that contact information if you don't already have it. And then the deadline for protesting is February 26th. So we're about halfway there. There's plenty of time to get your questions answered. Yes, sir. Okay, so and I'm going to repeat all the questions because we are online, so they can hear us. So the question was, do we know already how much property has protested the project? And we have not added it up yet. We've received several letters, but we were just talking about it before the meeting, and we have not added it up at this time. It's important to note the method of assessment for this project, and it was consistent with last year, is on a per parcel basis, meaning you pay for the work that's done in front of your property. Within the Century Code, the city has options for assessing based on a proportion of the overall project or a proportion of the front footage of your property as a percent of the total front footage alone of the entire project. And there's different combinations of those methods that you can use. But it seems more straightforward and more, I guess, widely accepted to just assess for the work along your property frontage. And so that's the method that the city's chosen to use on this for these projects. And again, I want to mention on corner lots that if you do live on a corner lot, and if there are improvements along the street on both sides of that corner lot, there is the potential to be assessed for both of those if your concrete needs to be replaced on a corner lot. So we wanted to show a couple examples of assessment scenarios. This first one is a corner lot, and you can see the red outline around this sidewalk and curb and gutter. This is just intended to show, again, there would not be an assessment in the corner here if we need to replace a valley gutter for drainage or ADA ramps for pedestrian accessibility. Okay, this would not be assessed. But in this case, if this concrete was in bad shape, then the assessment would apply to both sides of this corner lot. Here's an example of a lot where you can see it in yellow here. There's a lot line shown here, and then there's a lot line right on the edge of the driveway over here. And so this lot would only be assessed if all this concrete needs to be replaced, right from lot line to lot line. Okay. Now, the way we bid these projects, concrete, 4-inch concrete that's along the sidewalk is cheaper than the 6-inch concrete that you would put in front of your driveway here. And we do put 6-inch concrete at all drive approaches. And so if this is your property, the assessment would be for the price of 6-inch concrete here and for 4-inch concrete here. And it doesn't really show it on here, but if for some reason only half of the curb needed to be replaced, obviously we would only assess you for the curb that was replaced and not the curb that remained if it was in good condition.
So will those sidewalks be widened, what, before and after the bike
Yeah, that
widened,
we're generally trying to keep the width that's there. You know, if you start expanding it, sometimes you run into troubles getting into landscaping and all that. But for the most part, we're working on just keeping what's there, replacing what's there in terms of width and area.
This last scenario that we're showing you is an example of where there's no sidewalk along the frontage of this property. And we would come into this property then and add sidewalk, and then it would be assessed for sidewalk. Now, if there was already curb there and we only put in sidewalk, clearly you'd only be assessed for the sidewalk. The other difference with this is when there's not concrete to remove, then obviously you're saving money there because, like the previous example, if we removed this concrete, that's also part of the assessment, is the cost of removal and disposal of that concrete. And so here, it would be for the new concrete and generally be a little less per linear foot of sidewalk because it doesn't include the removal price as well. So hopefully those scenarios kind of present some examples of how we do this, and if you have something else unique or a specific example, just just let us know. We can address those. To summarize where we are with budgeting the project, the preliminary construction estimate right now is $3.9 million. The total assessments as part of the project are about $1.4 million. And as you saw in the letter, the assessment is over a 10-year period at 2.6%. And then looking at the schedule, again, the protest period ends here in a couple weeks. We're planning to advertise for bids and open bids at the end of March. Construction will occur between May and September. And then remember, it's important to note, this is 2022. And so October 1st of next year would be the deadline for prepayment in full if you did not want to finance this project at that 2.6%. And so that option is available if someone was interested. And it gives you a little over a year from the end of the project. I'll take the question in the back first, sir. It's the total project. It's asphalt paving. Yeah. That's the concrete work that would get assessed. Well, those items, the sidewalk, curb, are paid by the property owners. The concrete paid by the city would be those corner ramps and then valley gutters, the concrete valley gutters that cross the street. That's paid by the city. One more question here.
So basically what you're saying is the previous
Well, no, the streets alone and the ADA ramps would be 3.9 less the 1.4. So it'd be 2.5. Yeah. I should repeat again, the question is the 3.9 the net after removing the assessed sidewalk? And the answer is no. The 3.9 is the total project, including the assessed sidewalk and the asphalt paving and everything. And the 1.4 is what's being assessed. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. You know, so that, right. So the question was are non-for-profits, are commercial properties, and other larger properties included in that calculation of the 50% of the protestable area? And generally, yes, the larger properties are all part of that, and so they would be weighted a little bit heavier. But what is not included would be publicly owned land. So if there was a city parcel, for instance, that gets thrown out. And I don't have all the details of the Century Code in front of me. That is spelled out pretty clearly in the Century Code if someone was interested in looking it up. I believe the Century Code is referenced in the letter that you received, so I think you could look it up too. I want to go back to this here. Now, I guess I'm not familiar with the newer townhomes you're talking about, but if they are in this area here, that's Pioneer Haven? Okay. Okay. Maybe after this we can look at it closer on a map, because there is an island right where this white box is. There's kind of an island here that's out of the district, and so it doesn't count toward the area. We don't show it on this map, but we can look at it a little closer afterward. Again, it's a private drive, right, Lee? James. So it's a private drive, and so that's not even eligible for this city project anyway. So they wouldn't count toward the area.
That's state property, the Pioneer Haven. Okay, but yeah, it's owned by that Peaceful Pioneers LLC, I think is what it's called. So that, right, right. Like Carl said, I don't think a lot of those properties aren't even going to be in the district, so they're not going to be assessed and they're not going to be a part of the area calculation. Did that answer you guys' question? Right, yeah, it's by area, so it wouldn't go through 30% of the area protest. Well, it counts for the area of your property, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes, we. Sure. The question is it possible to have an individual property looked at again to see if the improvements are necessary? And the answer is yes. We're not going to force this on anyone if it's not a good fit. Now, the process that we've gone through was we walked the site parcel by parcel and did a field assessment and came up with these estimates. The amount that you see in your letters, and even the amount that the contractor bids in terms of the length of curb or the length of sidewalk, that is not set in stone until they actually tear it out and put in the new stuff, and they get paid for it, and then therefore you would only get assessed for what actually gets torn out and replaced at that time this summer. So whether it's right now or even during construction, if you have a question, flag our people down and just clarify, is it really necessary for all this to come out? And we'll look at it and we'll answer those questions. I will tell you, generally speaking, that if there was cracking in the concrete, even if the concrete didn't blow up and is torn up, but if there's cracking in the concrete, the way we generally look at that is we say, okay, we're committed to this project this year, and we really don't want to have to come back in 2 years and start doing more projects. We don't want to come back in 2 years and create another assessment district. And so if there's a chance that that crack in the next few years could turn into much more a tripping hazard, or it could separate more, then generally we've said, well, let's mark that for replacement. And that's maybe what you've seen on some of the maps. I don't know exactly what code section you're referring to, but or if it's a local ordinance. But a lot of times those ordinances are written in regard of snow removal, weed management, things like that, and that's what the implication is. Yeah.
So if they come in and they say, no, this is what we want to do, but this isn't its function.
Carl, can I jump in there?
Sure,
please?
absolutely.
So I think that this is part of city code
Yes.
that you're referencing.
Correct.
As part of that code, we want property owners to come in and maintain their own sidewalks. That's why we're assessing for sidewalk, and it's going to the property owners. I think it's a part of code that we don't always enforce, as far as writing letters to individuals saying, hey, you need to put your sidewalk in, or you need to fix this. What we had done instead is created the city sidewalk program, where it makes it more voluntary. Well, it makes it voluntary. Homeowners can come in and sign up to get their sidewalks replaced through the city program, because then it gets assessed. So if they can't afford to do it all in one chunk on their own, it's an option to come in and do it that way. So by our code, it's something that we want property owners to do and could go through code enforcement and do it that route. But since we're doing this project, we're looking at pieces that technically fall in that code of maintenance. That's why it's getting noted. However, that's why Carl had mentioned that happy to come out, meet with you, talk about it, and see if we can find some middle ground.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe that might be our last slide. Yeah, and so, again, I also want to make sure to not forget to thank you for being here, because that's exactly why we're here, is to be available, and we appreciate you getting involved and showing up, asking your questions. Go ahead and ask away. We can take more questions for the group now. We'll probably open up phone lines here in case anyone's online that wants to ask a question. And again, when we're finished with this format, we'll hang around. We'll be available to answer other questions you have. So, yeah, one more, and then we'll jump on the phones here. I don't think that mic is live, so go ahead, and then we'll just repeat the question.
So I have a neighbor here, Brian Allen, that basically thought of the, he had recently had a contractor bid out some contract work. And the first question I got here was, recent scope, what those concrete contractors changed. We get the design bid per square foot. By calculation, the city is charging citizens around $60.
So I'll repeat that, and then we can address that. The question is, the comment is that a property owner went and solicited some preliminary bids just to get some pricing information, and the price for private work, private contractor work, it seems cheaper than what the city's estimates are for these assessments. And that doesn't surprise me. So first of all, we need to make it clear, the city is only going to assess for the actual costs the contractor charges the city. There's no markup whatsoever. There's nothing like that as part of this project. But what you're probably seeing is the difference between a competitively bid project like we'll have to do with the city's project, and we're subject to the prices that are bid by that low bidder, by that contractor. And it doesn't surprise me to know that there might be some other contractors that might be able to offer lower prices. But once we bid this project and then the city awards for those bid prices, we're locked into those. And the prices we've used so far are estimates, but they're based on what the city has paid for similar work over the last few years. We don't. The bid is scheduled for March 30th. When we award the bid, the contractor submits a bid per square foot of sidewalk, per linear foot of curb. And when we award it, that locks in that price. But until that point, we were telling you that the prices you've seen are estimates. Your actual assessment would be actual. Okay. I'd be glad to clarify that. Yeah, I'm not trying to create any confusion. So if I can clarify that, I'd be glad to.
Like you said, we'll work the work will be done, and then we'll know exactly what you say. How can that be? I won't know until August if the work's done, but I don't know.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is because we have our quantities, we marked out in our drawings where the curb and gutter would come out, where the sidewalk would come out, where the driveway would come out. But what we pay the contractor is not based on what's shown in our plans right now. It's based on what they actually do in the field. And so, and that's a typical construction contract for this type of work. Yeah. And sometimes there are, in some types of public works projects, maybe a project at the water plant, we'll bid a project at the water plant as a lump sum. They bid it, it's a lump sum, that's what it costs. When there's a project like this where the materials can vary so much, and when conditions can change during construction, and we say, you know what, we changed our minds, we don't want to do that 10 feet, we're only doing 5 feet, so we want to be able to say, we only want to pay you for that 5 feet, we're not going to pay you for the full 10 feet. So we want to have that option to, help the contractor and the city pay for the work that's done. So it does go both ways, and that's the value of the unit price contract, which is what I'm describing. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we do our best. Like I said, we walked every parcel of this project to mark it out. Right, so we're doing our best to estimate it at this point. But we have to remember, as a homeowner and as someone that cares about my personal finances too, it's not a very comfortable thought to think, well, I think it might cost that, but it could cost more. I don't like that thought either. Unfortunately, the way these contracts work though, and I'm just asking you to remember, it could go up a little bit, but it also could go down. And that is per the Century Code. We feel obligated to disclose that because we don't want that to come as a surprise to anyone. So we feel like it's appropriate to disclose that, but that's straight out of the North Dakota Century Code. Yeah. Yeah, I understand your question. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what the North Dakota Code allows or doesn't allow in that regard. We can look into that, or we can work with the city attorney to see if we need to try to get an opinion on that, because I'm not familiar with the code to that detail. Sure, I'll repeat the question. This gentleman pointed out that in some states there's a provision in statute that says improvements or assessments cannot be made for anything more than what the improvements would do to increase the value of the property, I believe, correct? And so the question was, does North Dakota have that provision? And to be honest, I'm not sure. We haven't encountered that yet, so I don't know.
So in the case of, when are we going to know what basically the gift is in? And, that's questions to think about. What happens if I get a private contract to do this work together? There's nothing wrong with that.
For the most part, no. We would want to work with you because we want to, if you wanted to bring a private contractor in the month before the city's contractor comes through and do that, I think Loretta would be open to that. We would work with you on that. We want to coordinate that though, because if for instance your gutter has a belly in it and we're identifying a way to fix that and make sure there's no bird bath occurring anymore, we would just ask that you coordinate that with us so we can tell you, hey, yeah, if you're going to do this, can you please have them put it in here or this way or whatever. Right. Right, and then there's a permitting process, I think, right, to do the concrete work in the city's right of way.
Yeah, we ask that if you would entertain that option, that you come in and get the proper permit to do that concrete work. And that also helps let us know that you're looking at that avenue of moving forward to do the work. And we can help you then coordinate with Carl's team to let you know if there's some caveats that your contractor would need to look at.
So how much further are beyond that letter of February 27th? As far as the protest, to find out what they know, protesting the probably
So the last day of the protest period is February 26th at 5 p.m. So I would say the next day we would probably start looking into the quantity to determine if it was protested out or not. Yes, sir.
If it's protested out, would it be reassessed? For example, I know I have some sidewalk that doesn't need to be a lot of other stuff I consider cosmetic, right? If it were up to me, I wouldn't do it, right?
Okay.
Some probably does need to be done, but I would say, well, should it be a reassessment? Should there be a reassessment? Take out the cosmetic work, focus on the big work.
I understand your question, but I don't have a clear answer for you. I think if it's protested out, then we would have to come back to commission and look at doing the work on the street if we wanted to move forward with just that work. Once it's protested out, I think we can't move forward with the work that we wanted to assess. We could then look at doing that or moving the project down the road. So those would be discussions we would have to have after the protest, if it protests out.
Loretta, if I could add to that,
Yeah.
I just want to ask maybe if part of your question is you deciding whether or not you want to file a protest might be dependent on us coming out and looking at it again
Well, no, I already
beforehand?
answered that.
Okay, all right, okay.
But I'm just wondering what would happen.
Sure. If the project, overall, if the project is protested out and if it essentially kills the SID, then the next step would be the city would need to make some decisions about if there's going to be any paving work this year. If so, if it's going to be a much reduced scope, a different part of town. You know, obviously the city would like to do pavement maintenance, so I think the city would like to try to still squeeze in a project. But as you all are seeing, it's a process to get through to meet the time frame required to create a district and still get decent construction bids before everybody's in the middle of summer and marking up their prices even more. So I think the city would look at a different project, maybe not this project, maybe not this part of town, but it wouldn't be a guarantee that there'd be any project if it was protested out. Yes, sir.
The letter says, not will be, could be considered with up to 40%. Is that established by the
That is. I'm going to read that real quick so everybody can hear it. So the letters say the city of Dickinson may consider award of bids up to 40% over estimated costs. And that's your questions. And so yes, that comes from Century Code. But what's important to note in that sentence is it says the city may consider award. So, you know, the city commission, you know, we'll open bids and we'll look at them. And if it looks like they're really jacked up prices, the city commission has the discretion to not award that bid. And then we're probably back to the drawing board again, but it's not a guarantee.
Let's say you guys get, this the lowest bid was 20%, and the rest of them are 40 and 20. Obviously, you want to go with 20%, if that's not what the company really wants to do. Do you anticipate, just in your line of work, getting the bid in somewhere around 20%?
I think I'd like to ask you to clarify or maybe restate. I'd like to restate your question to make sure I'm understanding it, but 20 to 30%. Now, what we're talking about is we've got a current estimate, and say the estimate says sidewalk is $12 a square foot to remove and replace sidewalk, and whatever 40% of that is, 1680 or whatever it is. But now I'm stuck on the math. But anyway, if the bids come in a lot higher, where the bids are $16 a square foot to remove and replace the sidewalk, but if it's less than 40% above that estimate that we've already used, then that's where the city has discretion whether or not to award it. Now, if your question is how confident are we in our estimated numbers, we feel pretty good about them because we have the reference from the last few years that have been bid here in Dickinson. The time of year that you bid projects is important. You want to bid it about where we are right now, because if you bid something in June, July, contractors are already busy, and prices are going to go up. Is that your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was kind of curious, like, I think what you mentioned earlier is when you do get your bids in from the city, you say, okay, these are the bids you received, this is the one we're going to go with. Do some property owners question mark if they're going ahead, or do they find out?
That's a great question. So the question is, after the bids are open, how do the property owners know what the actual bids are? And there's not a formal process to notify the property owners of what that bid is. But I tell you, if any of you have a desire to communicate with Loretta or any of us, just email us or call us, and we'll tell you those numbers. There's going to be nothing that is not open public information. Yep.
And if I can jump in there, when those bids get open and we choose a company to move forward with, that has to come to city commission again, and there would be a decision made at that time. So that information would also be available if you're used to looking on our city website and following along with our commission meetings. But like Carl said, please reach out. We'll be happy to get you the information, get you numbers, answer your questions.
If I could, I know there's great questions, and we'll stay as long as you want us to, but we should see if someone's on the phone. Do you think?
Can I just ask, being that I'm on Florida, why is it that basically I'm charged for the fact that I got a private
That is an optional assessment method. The City of Dickinson has not chosen that, but that is an option where if you look at the total cost of the project, all the concrete, and then you assess people based on their percentage of land that they own within the entire district. That's an option, but like I said, that's just not the alternative that the city's chosen to move forward with, and that, quite frankly, is not very commonly used. It's a tough deal. Sir, I empathize with you because I think owning a corner lot would not be my preference either if I were in your shoes.
So if this project doesn't get protested out, it's go, what else goes?
That's correct.
Is there a website where we can watch to see how much the protest is going? Going around with that?
We don't have that noted, but I can sure check with staff and see if it's something that we could update and post on our city website.
So we can still negotiate the what sidewalk or curbing, stuff like that with you guys. It's not right, you can negotiate that or not.
Yeah, I don't know if I would use the word negotiate if it were me, but I would say, again, we'd be glad to come and look at it again. We do need to be consistent, so we need to be consistent throughout this entire district and from year to year. You know, there's a precedent that's being established now. So, but we're absolutely glad to come look at it again and revisit it. And so, again, reach out to us if you have that request. Yes, sir. Is it a vertical curb? Yeah. That's correct. It'll go back in as a vertical curb until your driveway. You know, we'll put a driveway cut in. But otherwise, it'd be a vertical curb. Well, if I'm understanding you right, sometimes you see those curbs that are kind of rollover curbs where, yeah, and if it's currently a vertical curb like that, an elevated one, it'll go back in like that. Yep. Yes. It gets added to your annual property tax bill over a 10-year period, right? Correct.
Well, let me, I don't know if there's anybody on the phone. I'm Brian Winningham, the city administrator. I'm like on day 63, so I do want everybody to take a deep breath, you know, because nobody's trying to hide anything here. This seems awkward to me because I'm trying to learn how we've got to this point where we're doing assessments, and these are years in the making. So, and I understand reading the code and looking at the assessments. If the assessment gets protested out, so you have a number of, you know, homeowners that say we're not doing this, that assessment gets protested out, not the project. The project still goes through. Then the city's going to ask you to pay for that concrete, that pay for your portion. You can have somebody come do it. It's typically more expensive with the city because we have to be bonded. We have to have all that stuff that the city has to require. You don't have to do that. You just have to have a person that's licensed and permitted to do concrete, and our costs are higher because we do the entire engineering project. So when you look at the assessment, it seems really extreme to me. Like, oh, well, especially if you live on a corner lot. And I talked to the mayor about this and said, well, if a couple neighbors got together and they batched their own program, 3 or 4 neighbors got together and said, no, I want this portion that's been assessed. This is bad concrete. That can be relooked, as Carl was saying. But ultimately, somebody comes out and looks at it and says, you have to replace this part. You protested the assessment. That protest also says we can't amateurize it over 10 years. The city does a 1.5%. That was the policy, and that's really just the administrative fee over a 10-year treasury, which is pretty low. It comes out to about 2.6 over the 10 years. Still, if it's $3.9 million, that's a lot of money. So all I'm saying is, the protest part doesn't really get you out of the project. The city still has to maintain the health and safety of all the city streets and curbs. And so I struggle with it too. I'm looking at it going, okay, well, is there a way we can, and this is just me talking, is there a way that we can push past that 1.5%? Can we pull that off? Can make it a cheaper amount? Because over this last year, COVID has been an issue, and there's a lot of economic issues right now for the city. Well, for the last 2 years, the city hasn't raised property taxes. And that's been a big contentious point because other places have raised their value. I think maybe the county, maybe other places have raised their property taxes, and the city hasn't. So that's kind of a bigger picture. I probably can't answer all the great details, but I've been reading through this assessment, working with our assistant city engineer and trying to figure out, okay, do we have any flexibility? Can I go to the commission and have some flexibility for citizens and say, how do we reduce this? Is there costs we can reduce? And I don't know if there's an answer for that right now, because if it's not this, area, it's going to be the next area, and you may not see any more work for another 10 years in your area. And that's, if you drive down 21st, it's pretty bumpy, right? And that's something we're addressing. We have to go back and look at it and go, why did that mastic not settle? All those things have to be considered, and that's only paid for by the 1% sales tax. So the entire city's sort of maintenance gets a very fraction of it, and we have to look at those and say, okay, when we do the assessments, the property owner is responsible for that sidewalk. And so I'll tell you a story about this. A citizen came and said, hey, this is my sidewalk. Yes, it is, but it's also a right-of-way. So it's shared, but I still think you should have, all the ownership. So when someone's standing on your sidewalk and they're moving your trash can, you can get mad about that. You can say, hey, this is not right. This has happened recently to me. And so the idea is we're making you pay for a sidewalk, and you have some rights to it. Somebody shouldn't be able to stand out there and do whatever they want in front of your house. At the same time, we're asking you to fix and repair it. We don't send people out, typically, going around looking for broken sidewalks. It's typically a complaint. And I'll have to ask the city attorney about liability. If somebody falls down because of a crack on your sidewalk, who becomes liable for that? I don't know that. In other places I've been, it becomes the homeowner. They can come back and try to make you liable for falling down because you have a raised crack because you wouldn't take care of it. That's something I'm trying to figure out in my head, if it makes sense, and this is why we're saying we're assessing it. Part of me, I thought it was a good deal. Well, it's assessment, it gives you 10 years. But if I had a bill for $22,000, I'd be pretty upset too. And I'm just trying to figure out where the city will have flexibility. Any questions? I may not answer details, but I'm just trying to say, philosophically, I understand why this is such an emotional issue. Yeah. I think it goes to that point where we've assessed. Is it curb and gutter that we've assessed also? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's basically out to the apron of the road, and yes, that's based on what I've looked at. Yes. Well, it's not necessarily private property. It's still considered I say right away. That's actually not the right term. It's an easement. If it's a right-of-way? Yeah, it is part of the street, but it's also because of utilities. So usually, if you look at when you get a property platted, and you come in and have it platted, then there's a North Dakota code that says it has to be an easement for utilities so that the city can put all of their water and sewer there. But then there's also what the city considers a right-of-way, which is part of the street, right? It's a longer portion of that. So you only own by deed up to that right-of-way or the easement, and you have to look at your deed and see where that's at. Like, what does that look like? And I think it goes into the sidewalk, or it crosses into that. That's an easement. You have to give the city an easement because they have to be able to work on the curb stop, and that's why if something fails, you don't have to necessarily pay for that out of a single owner, right? If something fails in that curb stop to our water distribution, you don't pay for all that. I mean, yeah, we all pay for it eventually because it comes out of our assessed taxes, but it's a very fraction. The city is actually paying for all that. The homeowner doesn't bear all that cost. And that's why for this project, you're only bearing that one portion of the sidewalk that's in front of your property or on your deed. You can look at your plat and see where that's at. And then, I'm going to learn that too and look at where our city requirement is, which is, I think ends really at where the sidewalk ends. That's what I believe right now, and we'll get more answers for that.
Brian, if I could comment just to clarify, there are a lot of situations where it is an easement to build sidewalk or the road, This particular project is platted right-of-way, so it is all right-of-way, basically up to the back of sidewalk. You know, give or take a half a foot. It kind of varies maybe, but the right-of-way is on the home side of the sidewalk typically throughout this project.
So we sit in the meetings before anybody does developments in the city, and when they try to put a new house in or something, then that's, you know, you'll see around the city that some people don't have curb and gutter necessarily, and then when they go to sell that house, that essentially that person that buying that house, it gets required to fix that. They have to then put that sidewalk back in. So somebody asked a question about, does it help the value of the property? Well, if that property doesn't have a sidewalk, and then they sell it, or they do something with it, that during the deed process, they say, okay, you have to now get this sidewalk up to code. I believe that's what's happening. And so this does add some value because, you know, it should be based on a proper bid and a proper company, and there's only a couple I know that bid on these that I'm aware of. Mm-hmm. And so they're pretty reputable, so you get 10, 15 years worth of concrete, maybe not. And that's why if somebody's in front of your house damaging your concrete, you can call the police on them, and they should be able to do something about it. But I don't know, is there any other, some of this is philosophical, and so I'm trying to answer as many as I can so that at least if there's some real sticky, upsetting question, it's okay to ask them. Go ahead.
So the contract is estimated at 3.9, correct? That's the estimate on it. And then it was decided that a portion of that would be assessed back to the homeowner. And so what is the percentage of that that is being assessed back to the homeowner?
What's the total? It's a good question. What's the total? What was assessed? So the 3.9 million, let's say, I think it's close, like 1.3 million is the sidewalks that total, and that's removal. It's, you know, square feet, it's all that stuff, right? Bitumen material, all that stuff, and that's about 1.3 million. So what portion of that 1.3 million is the citizens having to pay for? Is that right? Like what portion of that, and then who determined that? Well, the determination for what the citizen was to pay was how much broken concrete is on your plat, right? That's the math. If you have longer broken concrete around your property, you're going to wind up paying more because it's broken concrete. Does that make sense? That's what I think.
There are people that have 0% responsibility.
If they don't have a project in front of their house, they're not paying anything because we're not repairing any concrete. It's only for the repairs that are being made for that concrete. That's the removal, that's the No, that was the engineering assessment of the concrete, of walking out there and actually doing the fundamental assessment on the ground. And if that's the contention, if hey, my concrete's good, then I think that's a worthy protest. I think that's, hey, come out and reassess it. And so if that's everybody, it may increase the cost for the project. But I think that if a person looks at their concrete and says, this is not right, then we need to go out and look at it again, or at least that portion. I don't believe that concrete in general is subjective. I think that you can look at concrete and tell whether or not it's going to, if it's cracked or broken, and it's going to heave. And so some of it is all the machinery and all the projects are going to be there anyway, so it's going to be cheaper in the long run to have it done. Whereas if we come and do a project and then your concrete doesn't get repaired and then it's broken, then you get, basically you bear all that cost later. That's what I think anyway. You may bear that cost. Generally, for stewardship, it is a stewardship issue, and we only budget a portion of the tax to sidewalks. So that also is budgeted for all the other utilities and all the other streets that are throughout the city. So I guess, I mean, to be into the sort of, I guess, murky details of it all, there's a millage or there's a rate, and that's called, ad valorem. That's basically a tax that everybody universally pays throughout the city, right? And you should get the same quality of service. That's my job. I'm supposed to make sure everybody gets generally the same quality of service, and you should be satisfied with that. Then there's these special assessments where that we know that we can't bear all the cost of the broken concrete. And I think that's where the rub is, whether or not that seems fair. That seems equitable, because just so happens I bought a house that has a bunch of broken concrete in front of it, or my concrete is broken and maybe it seems excessive. I don't disagree with that. I think what you're saying is, it may seem unfair, and it may be unfair. If we go out there and look at it and say, yeah, this concrete, not that it was a bad quality of work, because that does happen also. There's been projects during the boom where developers have come in and they raced in and everybody just wanted a house. And so if you go to, I'll just use the Sundance, there were things that they didn't finish the lighting, and there's still citizens paying for a portion of the lights. And so we're trying to go back and figure out how to make that right, and the developer kind of nowhere to be found. And that's what we're trying to prevent in the future too with development. So that was probably not the answer you wanted, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that if we would have raised taxes for everybody, right, we would have just raised property taxes, and that's a set value, then we could have budgeted more money for your sidewalk. Then I think you'd have more people coming and saying, why am I paying for your sidewalk? My sidewalk's good. Why'd you raise our taxes? And that is one of the commission policies that we can address. Basically, should we raise taxes for everybody in the city so that we can grow our budget for a sidewalk repair?
Then you're gonna raise it another 40%.
Well, I don't think you raise it 40%, but
$35,000.
I agree. No, I absolutely agree. I agree with you. I agree with you, and I can't say that, this is a place to talk about it. This is the place to be upset and say, can we go back to the commission as a city, you're the citizens, and say, is this right to do this? And I know that that's up to the 5 members to say, well, we can raise the tire taxes, we can do those things, but this is the place to share that. And I think that's what matters. I think that's part of this, that's why I moved to Dickinson, so that we can, because there's a lot of kind people here, and you can come and you can have your questions answered, and nobody's hiding anything, at least that I've seen. I mean, it's a fair point to address it that way and say, is there another way to do it? And do other cities do it differently? Is there other options that we could use and say, no citizen should pay, X amount, right? I think that's something that I'm going to take a note as soon as I sit down here, and I think that's something to bring up to the commission. Is there ideas that make more sense, especially, or do we cap it? And I don't know if that's been a discussion before. If there's a cap, if there's something that makes sense. And I believe in North Dakota, other cities, and especially because we're a home rule city, which means we get to make the rules for the city the city can be a lot worse at it. They could actually increase a lot more of the taxes, and they could do things that I think would make citizens more upset. So I think there's a balance there that obviously that's not a balance. When you have to pay $22,000, there's no balance there. So I agree with that. I just have to make sure that when I give staff recommendations to the commission, hey, our policy may be flawed, right? This may not be the best policy, and we need to look at maybe making a cap. And can we afford it? No. Okay, then we're going to have to raise the taxes. But I think we're going to get better at our message, get better at explaining that, and that way, when somebody complains about the city taxes being raised, we can say, well, that's because your fellow neighbor and your citizen was paying, too much money. And most people that I've come in contact with here say, well, we care about each other. I mean, that's what I hear. So, and that's why you're all sitting in here. In the back, right, real quick.
Brian, Cassie, Tail, Dave, you guys ever been in contact?
Yeah, you can talk to me, James Kidrowski, and yeah, you can come up to our office, or I can give you my phone number afterwards. Yep, no problem.
The other thing is, just because my name, Loretta Marshik, is in the letter with my email, if you want to pass those on to me, and I can sure share them with James, just because I know you already have that, I'm more than happy to do that. And just to go off of what Brian had mentioned a little bit ago. So in last year's project, we didn't see the difference in amounts like we are this year. So we didn't see corner lots with assessment values at that level. So when we saw that, myself went and looked at different communities in North Dakota to see how they do it, to see if there's a better way. And so I didn't put a bunch of time into it, but I was curious to see if there's a better way for us to do this so that we aren't coming out with some of these really expensive assessments. And that wasn't helpful for me. So what I had found was that a lot of communities assess everything. So that wasn't a helpful answer. So there's going to have to be some other discussion to see if we can find a way, whether it's capping it or mitigating it some other way, because it seems like we can do better in the policy. Because I think everyone can agree, none of us would like to get that letter.
Especially when, when I walk, I look at my curves, my sidewalks, it's like, my gosh, what's wrong with it? So I'd like somebody from KLJ to come out and say, this is what's bad with this piece, this is what's bad with that piece, so I know, they look good to me.
We haven't changed in 32 years.
I got one spot where the sidewalk sunk. They're gonna replace that chunk. The 20 feet next to it, they're not gonna replace. They look the same except the sidewalk. Why are they replacing the curb and gutter?
Yeah. And I can come out and look at it if you want to schedule a time.
They can pour new concrete up to the whole curb, can't they? If it's okay? I mean, it looks the same, it's not broke or nothing.
Even our law
I would imagine.
is fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
Doesn't make sense.
So on your letter, I know Loretta's on there. It's okay. I'm going to go get some more cards. So everybody has my card because my email's on there and my telephone number. And I typically answer my phone, my cell phone. That phone goes to my cell phone. So I'm usually always able to answer the phone. And then if I miss a call because I'm in a meeting, you leave a message on my phone and I'll get back to you. And so it talks about the city auditor in one of the emails, and I'm actually the city auditor as well. I don't really know exactly what that means because it's not really defined. But basically, I'm the person that's supposed to go and audit all of our departments, and that's really what it means. But we use the term interchangeable as city administrator and city auditor. Usually, auditors should be somebody who's qualified, but like a CPA. But it's really more about the process and what we're doing. And so my role is also to take all the comments from the citizens too and say, oh, how do I have a better policy that I can recommend to the commission? They set the policy and then we execute it. We just do the operations part. But we do these meetings so that we get public comments and then we can better inform the commission about your your comments or your thoughts.
I think the first point is what you find a way to end up raising property tax, so that it's equitable for everybody. Like this, there are 21,000 on my phone.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think there's some. If I have the authority and the city engineer, which right now we don't have an interim yet, but has some ability to have some judgment, then we should be able to go out and do some assessments. And that's why we've hired an engineering company. And that judgment is, I don't think that all of that has to be done. Maybe that can help some of the costs. Ultimately, some work has to get done, and that's part of living in the city. It just, and we all know that, but it shouldn't be so skewed. It shouldn't be such a big number. So Loretta and I will work obviously really closely together to figure out what the next step will be for that. But I can't make a promise, but I can say that what I'm going to do is figure out how we make this easier to go forward, which is I'll recommend to the commission that we cap it potentially, or that we work somewhere in the budget. But I don't know if that's going to fly. I really don't. I don't know that. I think because we're bound by the public process, right? For all the reasons that it should be, transparency and all the things that so I don't think we can go beyond that date as far as the initial, your protest letter may help us to get this done quicker though, right? Because if we get enough protest letters, then we have to really look at it, and individually we should look at it anyway. So it doesn't take that long. We're a city staff that's here. That's what we're here, 8 to 5 to address concerns. So it's not as if it's going to get lost somewhere. You make a phone call, you email me. It's not like, I'll get back to you. It hasn't worked that way since I've been here. The project won't be stopped. So I was trying to, the project isn't going to be stopped. It's whether or not the assessment, it's whether or not the fund, the amount you're going to pay, right? The project's going to go, but what should be in contention is not just the protest for the assessment. It's whether or not that's actually legitimate, like the concrete that you have, like the, hey, I don't think that's right. This is not broken concrete, and that may increase a little cost for us, but that's okay. We're talking about here and now. We're talking about if your protest, define that. Put that in the, I don't think, take pictures if you have to, but basically give us, you should get a positive response, meaning somebody should come out there or somebody should address what you're saying. It shouldn't just get lost in the, this isn't the federal government. It shouldn't get lost in the bureaucracy. That's me. There's no bureaucracy. Somewhere I should be able to address your concern. Even if it's every one of you in this room or whoever comes in, we should be able to look at that and address it. That's what I get paid to do.
I would be more concerned collectively as a community than for myself. I don't want my neighbor to have to pay $20,000. That's a concern.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm going to have the authority to change that. And we have a really, really outstanding commission. They're one of us. They're here to figure out, the mayor has got the same concerns. I think his was $11,000 when he did his, something like that. And then he basically pooled it with the neighbors. And I do know that we're not, by a standard, going out and looking for broken curbs right at the moment. I mean, we have other things we're doing. It's not that. But also, if you had a broken curb and you wanted it fixed, and you came to the city and said, when's this project? Nobody's done that either. Nobody's come to us and say, I don't field any, you may, Loretta, field some complaints, but I don't field that many complaints that they say, this road is messed up. which may be a good sign, or maybe just because, well, now there's ice on it, so you don't notice it.
Brian, were the commissioners asked to attend this meeting?
Were they asked?
Yeah. Or could they have come if they wanted to?
Well, sure, they could
Yeah, I
have.
know you're going to be a mouthpiece kind of.
Right. Could they have? Yeah, they could have. They could have attended. I mean, in general, I think they want the staff to do their job. I think they want us to host these meetings to get the comments so that they can have some reflection, and we should do our professional part of making these questions make sense to them and say this is the concerns of the citizens. That's why the protest letter is really important too. It's not just a boilerplate. You know, I'm mad. Okay. So I would ask that if you haven't sent an email, please do, and put some, you know, a couple of sentences in there to let us know what we're looking at. From the letter?
Email.
Okay, yeah, if you have done, yes.
You know, it's like, I sent it, but hey,
Did you send it to Loretta or to Rita?
it'd be nice to say, all we'd have to do is respond to, yes, I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll work on
Okay,
that.
did it go through? Did they get it? You know?
Yeah,
Just so
go ahead.
both of you know, so depending who got it,
I sent it to Rita.
okay, so she fielded it through to either, and copies myself and our administrative assistant so that we can keep track of those. And I don't think I directed either one of them to respond. So we sure can go through all those.
Just take 2 seconds, just say, yes, we got it.
Yep. that-
I agree.
Thank
No,
you.
absolutely.
That's great input.
Absolutely, and I'll tell Rita that tomorrow, because there'll be more people sending them in, but I'll tell Rita if something comes in, I don't mind sending it back, but you can also send it to me. If you don't get a response back, you can also send it to me, and I will get it back to the staff, but I typically respond to emails, even if I'm just saying, you know, acknowledged or received, but that's probably but that comes from my military training, where I'm just kind of bound to do that.
It's probably worth mentioning too, the approval process for creating the SID needs to formally go back to the city commission. It's not a default, you know, so after the protest period ends, then there's another city commission meeting, and that's where they will consider a resolution to formally create this special improvement district. And so, you know, as many of you probably know, during the city commission meetings, there are opportunities for public comment.
And really, for me, it's helpful that all of you have come tonight and shared your comments, because when we have that meeting and commissioners ask questions, it'll help me dig into it and have some answers and some staff recommendation to move forward, so that we're not dragging it out further and trying to get them responses. So I really appreciate you all taking your time to come tonight.
The rest of my next part, so where we go. So you're not saying we're going to get a guinea pig and next year's going to look at. By all the time. Yeah. It very well help.
Well, in some ways you are the guinea pig, because I have to say, last year, we moved forward through the same process and we did not get a lot of comments. Questions about how the process works, but we didn't have the big range in dollar amounts. If we'd have had that last year, we'd have looked into that more and refined our process. We did. It's just the properties are different. Some of the way the corner lots are is different. Maybe the condition of the concrete is different. Maybe we just didn't get people that come forward. Maybe the economy is different. I'll get to you in a second. But that's when we get comments. That's when we dig into things and realize that there's concerns and we need to look at those. So in a manner of speaking, I'll take away, we all will, what's been shared with us this year and try to make it a better project next year. And as we go, we just try to keep getting better. So I don't know if that really answers or helps things out here. But I'm going to talk to the Public Works Director about that and see what I can do with that.
I think that's a sunk cost. I think snow removal is a sunk cost in our, we do that regardless. You know, that's just a machine, but I don't think we paid extra people though overtime for snow removal. No.
This is true.
Yeah. My 8-year-old was
There's the question in the back.
Yep. Sir, you had a question.
What were some of the other projects you had? I know you had
Yeah, that area, and then from Fourth to the west, was this same mill and overlay program last year in those residential streets.
I'm not sure what the difference was, to be honest. We had 4 different areas in town last year.
Yes, and I'm forgetting the street names and numbers, but in that area just west of 4th Avenue East, the first couple blocks on the north end of that segment that run east-west, I mean, there were blocks where the concrete was just falling apart, the entire block, and every house in a row replaced all their concrete. But like Loretta said, we just didn't get the same feedback last year, but it was the exact same program.
I know last year, we'll
We
go back
do
to
have
what-
all those records. We're
Yep.
actually working with Loretta's team right now to finalize the quantities and the assessments for last year's project based on what was put in the field. So we do have that.
Very similar to what we're estimating this year. It's right around that 1.5, 1.4.
Yeah.
So our sidewalk, street, and other maintenance program, you know, basically it gets set by, you know, every year, but it's not just one annual rate. It's, you know, we look at 5 years out, and we look at how that will affect the entire city, and so it's kind of like the Golden Gate project. Start one end, paint it all year, and then you restart, you know, on the very first of the year. It takes a whole year to do it. This is similar in that we don't have enough city funding, really, as that we don't tax enough to do the project we want to do. I think it was 6.5 million was the actual, this is what we'd like to do, and we dial it back to a smaller section so that, because we can't do it all, because we just don't have the tax base to do that. And so that is the same token, something to look at when we go before the commission and say, all right, what do we cut or what do we reduce in order to put more money into maintenance, into streets and sidewalks? And that's something worthy for us to go forward with, especially when we do a budget cycle in the summer, and that sets what the projects are for, and that's what we're trying to do this year. Same thing, but I think I have more comments from you that allow me to make those recommendations to the commission.
Yes, sir.
I've got kind of more of a technical question. You may not have the answer. I kind of came just to kind of see the process. The number I have is quite small compared to what here used to be. So the district itself, the way I understand the folks that are in protest, that 50%, is that right?
By land.
So it's total square footage of the property, right, in the district, I assume?
Correct.
What is that total, do you know? And then my question gets a little more convoluted at that point. So when I look at the maps, there's a lot of properties that aren't going to be assessed anything because they're in my court. So those folks actually get the letter that this district's been formed? I guess the reason I ask that question is, if there's 100,000 square feet and 50,000 square feet of the property didn't get the letter, there's no chance that it can protest out.
Yeah, that's it, I get what that's interesting, like, I get what you're saying.
It's more of a technical question in
Yeah.
terms of square footage. Do you have those numbers? You now know that there's 2 million square feet. I don't know, I'm making up numbers here.
Was everybody notified in the SID?
Because what I heard here was
That's
some people
100%,
said
yeah.
that their neighbors have
Yeah.
$25,000 and they might only have $4,000, and that doesn't seem fair. So what if that neighbor doesn't have any work and thinks it's unfair and wants to protest it? They don't know
What that is. So did everybody receive a letter in the SID? Yes, okay, but not, but,
even if they didn't have anything being said.
Right, when we hit that new boundary, basically, our GX software, we can pull up all of those contractors. So everybody in the zone got a letter. LJ helped us put them together so they were individualized. We have gotten some back. So staff worked really hard to make sure that, a couple of instances of things sold that we need to do within those couple weeks of collecting those addresses and sending them out. So we reached out to the property owners to make sure they had the information for where the need. So, yes, they were notified. As far as the acreage for the whole thing, we can easily calculate that. It is not something
That means I don't understand.
so I don't know where at the public record, right? I don't know, do we put that out as a norm? Is it a searchable public record? Like, so this assessment, preliminary assessment that the KLJ did, is that number, can you put that out there without somehow, because it's your personal information, do we put that out?
I don't think we put that out, however, if they call or email or whatever and contact us, our staff has those.
PER, right? Isn't it PER? The dollar amount? Yeah, dollar amount per person.
Because if somebody were to ask me how much a property, a commercial property, or would I be able to tell them?
Yeah. So the
So if you ask
PPR,
me, like the church, right?
Mhm.
Did somebody ask that? They're the highest assessed value of all of it. It's like $26,000. So I don't know if they might be willing to protest with you. But that is the highest one, but there's a few others that are as high. Pretty close.
The preliminary engineering report that I mentioned in the back, that's been provided to the city commission in a commission agenda packet, and so therefore it is available if
Okay.
someone wanted to look it
Yep.
up. It's got a table in the back that's got every single parcel in this district and the estimated assessment amount there. So that's available too. I wanted to touch on something, it's circling back to a while ago, but I want to clarify, if there's interest in doing your own project outside of this to do the concrete improvements, again, we want to work with you on that. I really need to emphasize, though, and please tell your neighbors, to not wait until we're in the middle of construction and you see we're a block away, because at some point, we got to cut it off and we got to say, no, this contractor is going to charge us a change order if all of a sudden we start changing the whole program, or if some other third-party contractor is in there and shuts down their crew because they've got other equipment and everything running around. And so at some point, it will be too late. At some point, we're going to say, you know what, when we're this close, we're just going to have our contractor continue through. So if that's of interest to you, just start that coordination early, and please tell your neighbors to do the same. We want to work with you, but just please don't wait till it's the last minute, right before our crews are coming down your block, because that did happen last year, and we did have to tell a couple of property owners that they weren't able to do their own work, and the city's contractor came in and did it. So please keep that in mind.
I think
Yeah, I think it's 1.4. It was a comparable amount, I remember. In the ballpark of 1.5, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
These people want to hire somebody with a private contract to do their work. That contractor comes in, and while he's taking their first and better out, he damages the city street, he's responsible for that.
If it's right before our project this year, and if it's a street that's going to get torn up already, I'm sure we'll work through it. If it's a, it might be a case-by-case type of situation, though. Yeah. It probably is a matter of timing and the situation with them.
Thanks for having the meeting.
You're welcome, and once again, thanks for coming.
Thanks
The fact
for
that you're
coming.
involved is really important, so thank you for being here.
Better than us getting a letter 90 days out saying, guess what?
Take my card on the way out too, so you'll have my email. If the process somehow gets confusing, please get me involved too.
Hey. Yeah.
Yep, just